You are watching the show 2-on-1. Hello, this is the internet's top sensation 2-on-1. I am the Reverend Arthur Stewart.
I'm the Reverend Stephanie Kendall.
And hey, we're the two who will be having a theological conversation with the one to be introduced in just a moment on a pop culture topic of his, her, or their choosing. We do know what it is in advance. We're expecting a marvelous guest, Teresita Matos-Post. We're going to talk West Side Story. But before we do so, how are you today, Spiff?
I'm good, I think. Yeah, I am excited to be in a new year, to posture ourselves in new ways, to think of new ways to do ministry. And I like newness. And so we are living into all things new. Last week's episode with Nathan Russell was incredible.
Yeah.
And I'm just really also very excited to do Sondheim month.
I know. Happy Sondheim month and happy New Year.
Happy Sondheim month and New Year to you as well.
And happy season of Epiphany. We have shifted over now to liturgical green. It's a season of growth. And also, thanks to climate change, it's literally a season of growth. Like, oh, it's hot outside. Maybe. I haven't really been outside today. I live here now.
I'm staying in, but that's a different thing. But I do love Epiphany. I think that there's something. We are doing a series right now. I write monthly curriculum, as you all know, and this year's theme is called Root. And so we are, this month, we are rooted in discernment, and to kind of figure out what this new year holds for us. And part of that discernment is which ways are we going to grow? How are we going to understand our roots as both stability and nurture and all of those things? And roots have a physical presence, which is what I also really like, but they just can't be seen. But Arthur, do you know what can be seen?
What can be seen?
Your liturgical wear when you are leading worship.
Did you just Jeff One-Row me?
I did it. I finally Deuces.
You Jeff, it is a new year and it's a new day. Deuces. It is the year of the deuce, by the way, being deuce, deuce, deuce. But you were telling me about Jeff One-Row Designs. Why don't you tell me all about her? Him, them.
I don't know if you looked at Jeff's Instagram lately, but they're growing as well. So I'm sure it's all the he's, them, she's, all everything in between and expansive that leads Jeff One-Row Designs, who is a liturgical textile leader, my friend.
Absolutely. If you go to jeffwonrow.com, jeffwonrow.com, you can see the wide variety and catalog of stoles, chasubles, copes, altar accessories, frontals, paraments, really anything you need in your church to convey it. Jeff One-Row Designs has got you covered, and they're celebrating 17 years of making ordinary time extraordinary, and they're doing that with a special discount code.
They are, as we told you all last year, the 2-on-1 discount code was ending, and that's true. We did not lie to you. It was ending. It did end, but you can use our new code because Jeff. Bing, for those of you online, we will also say it is 2-on-1, all letters, and then 1-5, those are numbers. So 2-on-1 15 for 15% off your entire stole order, which is no joke, hands down, the best deal that you will ever get for stoles at Jeff One-Row Design. He promised our listeners the best code, and he has stuck to that word. His own viewer or his own page only had 10% off during Christmas time, and we still had 15. So we are always the best deal. So, and
honestly, you can't do better than Jeff One-Row Designs.
You can't. It's legit.
It's legit.
I got so many. I gave people them for Christmas. I gave them. We have an ordination coming up. Like all the things. They're just so great.
And of course, maybe I'm working on a custom design for when we're together in 2023. General Assembly, and maybe there's a live show, maybe there's a book, there's a whole bunch going on, Spiff. We gotta catch up at some point.
What, there's definitely a book, and with that book will come a book, COVID permitting, will be probably a little bit of a book tour. You and I, we can go do some live 2-on-1s with some of our contributors.
Oh, that'd be super fun.
In our Jeff One-Row stoles.
I just want to go to the Olive Garden in Times Square. I'm sorry, I tried to say that with a straight face. I don't. And if I come to New York and you try to take me there, I will think it's hilarious, but we will not eat.
I will drop you off and say bye-bye.
All right, we should bring in Teresita.
No, we love Olive Garden. It's fine. We should bring in Teresita.
But when you're here on 2-on-1, you're also family. So let's welcome our guest today.
This program got really off the rails.
Teresita Matos-Post, welcome to 2-on-1. We're so glad you're here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Teresita, I am so excited to have you. You and I are friends outside of 2-on-1, but this is your first time meeting our audience and meeting Arthur. But I have just been singing your praises to Arthur. But tell our listeners who you are, what do you do, how they can follow, find you, support you. What's going on with you?
Sure. Well, yes, we've met working through our DMIN program at Drew Theological School, which is has been an awesome experience. I have been a United Methodist pastor for the last 6-7 years. I transitioned 2 years ago into a non-traditional form of ministry. So I've been serving at Beth-El Farmworker ministry here in Central Florida. I serve as the executive director. And my role here is to make sure that farm workers and our neighbors in need have all the essentials that they need to live with dignity. And so part of the work that we do, it's disrupting poverty in this area and racism and all the things that come with that.
I love the phrase disrupting poverty. That already just makes my heart sore. You're here, of course. This is Sondheim month, and it's good. And we're talking West Side Story today. So why West Side Story? Why Sondheim? Why?
What's your relationship to Sondheim and West Side Story, Dee?
Well, I have to say it's a bittersweet type of experience for us. I think for us, meaning Puerto Ricans, it's a white dude telling our story in many ways. And so I had to go back and watch West Side Story with a critical lens and not so much as a consumer. And I had to admit that I never knew that Rita Moreno was not the lead. I grew up thinking Rita Moreno was the lead. Because if you knew West Side Story as a Puerto Rican, you knew Rita Moreno and nothing else. Mm-hmm. And so that was something that I was like, oh gee, I never realized she wasn't the lead actress, that she wasn't the main character, because it was so huge for us to be represented by one of our own. Representation was the thing. And in so many ways, Rita Moreno has been a trailblazer in all areas of performing arts. And so for us, there has been historically a deep sense of pride in the work that she's done and the ways in which she has represented us. But also she got a lot of flack, right? For playing that role and in the ways in which it was portrayed, not so much to her own fault, but the ways in which that stereotypes, geared, right? How the story was told.
Absolutely. Arthur, you think he's got a question?
So I'm excited to learn, as a little gay boy who watched West Side Story forever, I too only really saw Rita Moreno because she's the best part of actually both versions, because she's Valentina in this new version.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I love that they kept her on. I mean, I think that shares and says, once again, as white men continue to tell this story, right? Like the new script is written by Tony Kushner, who I love, but again, does not represent a whole half of demographic of who this story tells about. But to know that what Rita has meant to so many, especially so many Puerto Ricans, to women, and to create a space for her in this new film that really shines. If you have not seen the new film, I highly recommend it. It's well done. It's really nice. Yes, there are casting problems, and we can talk about all of that later and what that means. But as a film itself, I think it's well done. And it's also interesting. Like, I watched it across from Lincoln Center, which is where the scene opens as they are rebuilding and gentrifying this space. And so you become really, just the physical ground that I am on, or that I was on, it was very much a part of this narrative. And I also then recognize, oh, I'm a beneficiary of this problem. And how and what do I do with that? And especially as someone who loves theater, musical theater, you know, and all of that. And so, yeah, just highly recommend the new movie, but also, you know, it's okay to critique the things you love.
Yeah, of course, absolutely.
And for our
I mean,
listeners or viewers who haven't seen West Side Story, it's Romeo and Juliet, but with knives. Or set in the late 50s in New York City, where two gangs, the Jets and the Sharks, deal with, well, a cross-cultural romance. And also, it is written by white guys in the 50s and 60s, and it deals with a white gang and a Puerto Rican gang. And we'll get to the song America. You were going to say something, Teresita, and I jumped in. Excuse me.
no, I think that that the idea of context, right, and the importance of how context in and of itself plays a role in this, in the making of the story, right, and so the history that is told is very much so the stories that I heard from my family members who during that time migrated to the United States, right, and so for us it's not so much entertainment, but it also resonates at a deeper level in which we see our relatives being played out in many ways, in the ways that they cohabitated that space, but also in the ways that they were perceived in that space. And so that has been interesting in the sense that it's really neat to see that portrayal.
Yeah, I would imagine. Seeing your history come to life, and again, you know, I did ancestry. I am about as white as they come, and so that has never been a problem for me to see in film. But to see women lead, especially like within the church and things like that, that the idea that representation matters, especially as you take a critical lens to the context in which you not only serve, but you know, who thinks they're being served, where's the location, you know, of your actual building. Is we all know, like, I serve a church that's on the Upper East Side, but we do not serve what is traditionally understood as Upper East Side people. That is not who comes through our doors. And so, you know, to take away any sort of critical lens is, I think, to really dull the spirit of God at work in a community that calls us forward and forth. And I think that it must in some way also kind of translate to, I think, this film. And also, I'm sure, you know, I've done a little bit of like the historical research, and I'm like, oh, I like the idea, or I like learning about the idea that, you know, there's kind of these turf wars, right? Who lives where and why? Because the why becomes really important, but who lives there, and what are the other people that are? It's not just white people and Puerto Ricans. They even name it in the space, right? And or in the movie, and I think in the text. Sorry, I've watched a lot of West Side Story, so the amount of like, I saw the new one that they just did on Broadway. That was like a very avant-garde kind of piece. It had cool visual effects. It was not my favorite version. But anyways, they named that there's just lots of, that the gentrification is happening, and the transitioning communities that are being both pushed out, pushed kind of north and south, and all of this. It is not just, you know, these two demographics, but it's a lot of people. Right. And so the question of who is not represented is always a question I think we should be asking.
Absolutely. And you know, and that's the nature of Manhattan as an island, right? It's organic. It ebbs and flows, and it changes. So West Side Story is pretty a snapshot of a time and a place that no longer is, right? So you go to the Upper West Side, it's no longer predominantly Puerto Ricans and Italians, right? It's so many, or Polish. There's so many other. It has transition. I believe right now it's mostly Dominicans and other cultures that have moved in as other groups flow out. So it brings us, it brings very much to light what the challenges that come with the changes in culture and demographics, and how do we interact with each other? How do we compromise? How do we learn to coexist and live with each other when we come from so many different places with so many different cultures and traditions? And so I think the turf wars, for me, translate in the ways in which and I know this is true for Puerto Ricans, and I can only speak from our perspective, is that sense of resistance to keeping a sense of identity in a place where we don't recognize ourselves. And so that comes with trade-offs, right? And sacrifices. And so in one way, in the role that Rita Moreno plays as Anita, you see her glorifying what America is, right? And what it means to her, to her family. I mean, when you watch, I watched a documentary on Netflix about Rita Moreno and her story, and she says, once she moved out of the island, she never came back. In fact, she lost contact with her brother. So there's some severances of relationships, and you almost have to make peace with that. And how do you keep a sense of self while also adapting to another context that's redefining you in ways that perhaps you don't welcome? And so how do you become a player and a role in that space? That's always being negotiated.
Wow.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Well, no,
No,
it's
really helpful.
It's brilliant. And I will name, like, I am a white man. I when we talk about queer theory and queer placement, I understand the negotiation part, but otherwise I'm like, I don't consciously remember a lot of times in which I've had to negotiate, and I apologize. Like, I'm just going to own that and then step away from the microphone.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's beauty in it too. So, when you look at, so the trope of the gang, right? Well, yeah, welcome to Latin world, Latinos are in gangs. It's nothing new with that stereotype. Well, when it comes to, we can use, how can I say this? We can redeem that image of the gang from the perspective that family members thrived and make a lot of effort to keep community together. So, for example, when my family moved to New York City in the 50s, they didn't all move at the same time. They trickled in, and they made sure that apartments were in the same building. And so all of a sudden, the one building had people from the same town, from the same area in Puerto Rico, and they all knew each other. And so there was a way of helping each other navigate the new landscape. That was a way in making sure that people got jobs, that they knew how they needed to, to live, right? And to survive in a city as challenging as it was, and it is in so many ways.
Well, friend of the show, Shonda Shah, whenever she teaches history, she always says it's not the story of individuals who rose above, it's the story of communities that came together.
Right.
Sometimes, like, the Supreme Court cases will be one person, but it's with a community behind them.
Absolutely.
It makes perfect sense of if you have the same language, the same culture, the same, it makes perfect sense. And yeah, what some people call gang, others call family. And there's a reason why people band together.
Well,
it's a technique for survival, right? And
absolutely.
resistance.
Yeah, I went to Amy Butler and Rachel Johnson when they were at Riverside put on a really beautiful thing for God and Guns. And the thing that stuck with me, that still sticks with me today, because it was like very much, a lot of liberal people being like, let's do something about the guns. What are you going to do? And they brought in people from what was called PICO. I think it's now something else, but these men out of Oakland who are just incredible. And they were saying, you can't just take someone's guns, right? You just can't, because it's a part of who they are. It is a part of how they feel safe. It is a part of their family dynamics. It is a part of their economic system. And so to just take it away and not recognize that you need to replace it with something is just as harmful as, or can be just as harmful in lots of many ways. And as you were speaking, it just reminded me of like just the stereotypes. Well, like gangs, and what does that actually mean? Well, it means family. It means community. It means someone has your back when you may not have a biological family or a community that has, that has failed to love you well. There's someone there that sees you in a space in which you are probably often really overlooked.
Chosen
and
family.
So, yeah, exactly. So it's this chosen family that we're seeing as a recurring theme in Sondheim, I think, throughout lots of it. Company is a chosen family, Into the Woods is a chosen family, West Side Story. But, West Side Story is Sondheim's first musical. It's out the gate. This is what he does.
Didn't want to, which I just find fascinating.
I know. But I think that it's, I think he's been telling the story of the people who love you well for a really long time. And I think that that's important. And I'm wondering what you all think of in regards to family and West Side Story. What might the church learn from that? Or what can the church writ large maybe do better around that?
Absolutely. I think that one of the takeaways from that story that I appreciate so much is that the heart loves who the heart loves, right? Mm. And so there's a point in time where, cultural boundaries or, feuds or whatever it may be that once separated us can be transgressed. It can be trespassed, can be totally obliterated. And that's the beauty of it, right? That we are so entrenched in our insistence of categorizing ourselves. As great as groups are to keep us, grounded, also the fluidity of community, right? And that we learn from each other, that we make each other better. I think that's something that the church can definitely take away. And I think as churches, we have been very stubborn, right? And keeping our boundaries very strict, very stiff, and not allow for love to move and ebb and flow the ways in which love does. And that we know that's the nature of love.
Teresa Hordowens was on our show Terry Hordowens, I'm sorry, my brain. Hi, Terry. I love you. I'm sorry. Terry Hordowens was on the show, and we ended up talking about blood songs, about The Preacher's Wife for our Christmas episode, because it's what we do. But she said, I got pushback. We get pushback about it. She goes, and in the Black tradition, blood songs are so different, and they're so necessary. And there's something about a man being lynched on a tree and his blood being shed. And that's the first time I really understood it. But yes, I mean, the rigidity is, unless we address it and unless we look at it with a critical lens intentionally and try it. And then in terms of family, I just want to veer off for a second into Anybody's in this film and in the 1961 version. So in the original, Anybody's is a tomboy, and she really wants to be a jet. I never remember who's the Sharks and who's the Jets. I'm sorry. She really wants to be a jet, and it's played for laughs. Oh, you're never going to be a boy. Get out of here, you scoundrel. And in the 2021 version, Anybody's is played by a non-binary actor. And it's almost hard, because when they're like, well, you're a girl, it's like, oh, no. And it goes from this like comedy to harshness, and it should make I remember reading reviews from our conservative brothers and sisters in Christianity being like, they shouldn't have done this wokeness anyhow. And it's like, okay, or maybe you just feel uncomfortable for a minute, right? Because that might make love happen,
right
or let love happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think whiteness makes us dig our heels in, because we have been the right way to do things for a really long time. And so going back to the blood song, the songs that use blood language in church is what we're talking about. And I was one of those people. I was like, I don't love it. I'm just going to name it. I didn't love. And through the years, honestly, through serving the park and conversations with Terry and serving the wider church, not whiter, but wider church, learning that it's meaningful, right? For so many communities in really beautiful ways that I had just whitewashed and said, like, this has no meaning and that's not mine to do. And it is just really, we are better Christians, we are better leaders, faith leaders, community leaders, when we can admit, or even just change your mind. It is okay to change your mind, to get new information, and for me to say, wow, blood language really still doesn't hold the same meaning for me, but I recognize that there are entire communities in which it is the most meaningful. And for me to want to do the work of justice and to not create or hold equitable space for that as well is white supremacy at work in the church once more. Right. And so, you know, like all we can do is name what we didn't know and try and do better. And I think that that is important. But, you know, because music tells the story of our people, our history, our future. It's the hope that we cast together. And so I'm wondering, recognizing that I'm asking, and you can absolutely obviously say no to answering this because I don't want to assume you are one human being and your one identity represents you and also is also, you know, part of a larger conversation. But what was the response what was your response to the music of West Side Story? Does it you know, Puerto Ricans are half of this cast. It's half of the love space that is being created. And does the music ring true for you? Does the music play anything into how you understand or see yourself in this space?
I think that in many ways it does. I think the dancing more does more than the music, but I think it goes along the way. It goes together, right? I think that that you know, you can't help but to, it's so catchy, and it does really truly align with what we can recognize as the music that translates our emotions and our expressions. So for me personally, that's my own personal opinion. Mm-hmm. It does, and I appreciate it. It also, the other thing that I appreciate is that it's not a caricature of Latin American music, mm-hmm. But that it infuses and recognizes that integration, right, of what was the music of the time. And so I think that is complex and beautiful in that sense. I do appreciate it.
I mean, it's burn. Oh no, please.
No, I wanted to make two comments. But Spiff, you were talking about, you know, changing your mind. Some people are not even willing to consider.
For sure.
Right? So first step, like at least consider that there might be another perspective out there that might inform your position or enhance it, and that in and of itself is change. But I'm always you know, just, I guess, frustrated with people who wouldn't even consider or just discount that others' opinions can influence yours in a positive way. And going a little bit back to the role of anybody, the church is here for anybody's. Mm-hmm. But we are always so focused on the ones that click automatically. That's easy, right? If you find a church space where you fit in, that's easy. But I see anybody trying to fit in and make, you know, their way into belonging to a family and really always being left on the fringe. Mm-hmm. And so what does that say about the role of the church of being that organic space, that flexible space where we might consider that anybody's really could be part of our family?
And we find a way to hurt people first and have it in our pocket ready to go before we find a way to let go of those rocks.
Right.
With the music, it's Bernstein at his best. Like, this is probably I don't want to say it's his masterpiece, but it's close. And you hear Bernstein and you know it's him. Mm-hmm. Like, it's really easy to pick out West Side Story from a variety of things. By the way, I just want to note, West Side Story lost every Tony it was up for to The Music Man. And I love The Music Man, but come on.
I don't. We all know this. I do not. I will only see The Music Man that is coming to Broadway because I need to see Sutton Foster on Broadway, and that is the only reason.
Oh, sorry. So you're not going to like Music Man March then on 2-on-1.
We're not doing a Music Man March on 2.
It's most of the summer. No, you can tell Bernstein from Bernstein. Okay, or you pick it out immediately. And with this show, you know what? You got the boy, like there's the snapping. If you ask a theater person or even a person who loves theater, do a West Side Story jump. Like, they could do it.
Oh yeah.
You throw your arms out and you'd land. So the new version absolutely paid homage, or what, not, I wouldn't say was stuck. It paid homage to the 60s choreography. It's just like how Chicago will always have Fosse choreography, whether it's going to or not. How do we differentiate homage from the concrete demands in the church? Like, how do we say we're going to do a Christmas pageant because we think it's meaningful, as opposed to we're going to do a Christmas pageant because we haven't missed one since 1961? Bring your grandkids who don't want to be here, make them cry being sheep because we have to.
I think that's a good question, and I think it requires something that I don't think the church is ready to do, which is to let go
Mm.
and invite people into the creative spaces, right? So what would it look like to have children, young people, and their families reimagine what that moment was in time and translate it to their real lives? I would suspect that it would bring about a lot of things that we are not ready to talk about or are not willing to look at or think about, right? We rather portray the glossy, rosy white, the rosy lens type of story that makes us feel good but doesn't makes us uncomfortable.
Mm.
I think the story of the nativities, as you bring it up, right, is one that it has so many handles to disrupt all the isms, and I don't think any of us are ready to do that, right? It just, I mean, I'm sure that some people are doing it in some spaces, but overall, we want our feel good moment.
Well, I wonder if we haven't taken that comfort and we haven't just shoved it into the rest of the world. I want to come back to what you said marvelously about your ministry, that you are disrupting poverty. It's the, I hope our listeners know this, but in case they don't, the reason why food is affordable, and by affordable, I mean so affordable that you can buy 3 bunches of cilantro and throw 2 of them away, is because we drastically underpay our farm workers.
Well, it's cheap to us, but it costs someone something.
It costs someone something. That's so much better. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so we are subsidized through the labor and suffering of others. Okay, I'm sorry. This is a diatribe. It will come to a question. I'm reading a book right now called The End of Myth: From the Frontier to the Border Wall in the Mind of America. It brings up the fact that the neo-Confederate movement, or at least the Lost Cause movement, emerged because of the Spanish-American War, because it was 30 years after the American Civil War, in which they were finally able to reintegrate the disgraced ex-Confederate soldiers into it. And they had a common enemy where it wasn't a white army fighting on behalf of people of color, quote unquote. I'm grossly overgeneralizing on purpose, but rather it was a unified white army against people of color and an empire that they were then able to attack. And therefore, knowing this, like, it also then creates issues about like our relationship with Puerto Rico. And for the last 13 years, is my math right? Essentially, it changes our relationship to all of this lost cause nonsense, which that's a completely different other show. But we find a comfort in a narrative that lets people benefit without realizing that it costs so many other people so much more disproportionately. And ultimately, it costs the people who are comfort the fullness of their human experience. Therefore, is it better to just like tear the Band-Aid off and be like, look how comfortable you are because you've been to, and like you are living, you think your life is this big, but it's actually very tiny and there's so much more you can do? Or is it better to like gradually warm the water up on folk, like boil the frog, as it were?
Yeah, there's never either or, but I would say that and I've seen it work both ways. One of the I'm getting chills because so one of the experiences, a simple, I mean, it doesn't require even anybody speaking. We have people, so we visit farms every week. Most farm workers cannot benefit from our services because they're working from sun up to sundown. And so we come to them during their lunch break on Thursdays. And so we usually bring people with us because that is a moment that is very small. It's maybe 10, 15, 30 minutes at the most. but it connects, the experience that we've had is that connects people to where their food comes from. It really connects that experience of seeing the hands and the feet that do the work, and is usually a very transformational experience for most, if not all, our visitors. Of course, the ones that do uh, do decide to come along already have an empathy there. There's a level of empathy, but I think it pushes it forward to for them to become ambassadors in their circles, with their friends and family members that they have seen this, that they have connected with. And so I think that it's a lot of work to be done, but I think that every little bit, whether it is the Band-Aid or even boiling the frog slowly, anything helps. Better than nothing. Yes, anything and everything helps. I think the human connection at the end of the day is what makes us at least touch that level of empathy. And also knowing our history. There's still a lot of people who don't know, for example, that Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens, and they don't understand the complexities of that.
We had whole presidents that didn't know that, I don't think.
Yeah, so so a lot of things that I find in America, in the continental USA, is that we don't know our history. We don't know our history, and so we can't change what we don't know.
That's the phrase. We can't change what we don't know.
Yeah.
And I think I mean, what I'm hearing from this conversation, which is just so good, is truth plays a role in who we are as people and how we can move forward and how we set others back. Knowing the truth about your food, knowing the truth about the land that you are on, knowing the truth about your history, your ancestors, the relationships that they had, and all of that. And I think, or I am thinking about West Side Story and how, honestly, how truth is essentially what kills them all, or lack of truth. Anita, saying, that Maria is dead, that makes Tony, that whole thing. I'm going to forget his name, but what is the man that Maria's supposed to date? That, huh?
Not Riff. No.
No. He's the
yeah, he's the lead, right?
Yeah. Sorry, Deuces, you all know that I'm I don't remember, but
her love interest.
Yes, her love interest. We're just gonna, it'll come to me. And he kills Tony. You know what I mean? It's a whole, it is the lack of truth in where Maria is, how Maria is, that ends up informing whatever his name is. It will come to us. Deuces, just drop it in the comments, that he then makes this really sinful error of killing someone else on behalf of this woman that he loved.
Is it Chino?
Yes. Is it Chino?
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry, Chino. It is Chino who shoots Tony. Thank you. Yes. So Chino's ill-informed, right? He comes to revenge Maria's because he thinks that all of these things are happening, or that what happens to Anita and just everything, right? The truth informs how we act in this world. And in today's space in which we continuously question what is truth, I think that there is a way in which we hold that intention with, no, not everything we have been told, especially by the church, is accurate or true, but there is truth to our gospels, to love, to the message of God, to our relationships, that needs to be valued in a way that we undervalue it, I think, socially.
Or at the very least, that it requires a question.
Yes. Right? How often are we just asking why? Why do we do, going back to your nativity scene, if every service, now this gets tedious and laborious in ways that I just don't think any of us have time for, but it's if we were to say next Sunday at any random worship we go to or lead, not next Sunday, but whatever, why are we opening in prayer? Why are we singing this song? Why are we gathered? We just, a service of why serves, I think, God's kingdom in a way that a service of because does not.
Well, and I think what I heard too is, it's the truth. Tomorrow, the truth will set you free. I forget who said that. But also, not the truth will kill you. Like, I don't think we put both of those together. Like, it's not just the truth is life, but the not truth is not life. And too often we lie to ourselves in order to, take on the rest, or to be able to deal with the rest. So my favorite song out of West Side Story was Officer Krupke. I'm sorry. I wanted to throw this in there because I think it's important. I don't know how it could be done in this day and age, and I just think if we had a 2021 version of West Side Story, would that even make it in there, or would it just end up with somebody having a fit? Never mind. I'm sorry.
I mean, we do have a 2021 version of it.
Yes, I mean one set in the 2020s.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
But that was an unnecessary diatribe. Excuse me.
Well, when I saw the movie, the 60s version, at least, I said, well, not much has changed. Right? So that you see it jumps out very, at least for me, it jumps out very it's very obvious to me that the treatment of Officer Krupke to the two gangs, even though he tries to address them both, is very different. Right? And so there's different approaches, and more like candid, more, hey, don't get in trouble, to the one non-Puerto Rican gang, and a little bit more aggressive, right, approach to the colored, gang. So I was like, oh my gosh, if I don't think you have to change anything.
Okay. I mean, yes.
In my opinion, I don't know.
No, I like that. I like that a lot. I'm sorry. I feel like I just bloviated at y'all, and I'm trying not to do that. As for
no, I think you listen, police reform is a conversation we have to be having. We can't be afraid to be having it. And I think that the fact that this show, written in the 50s and 60s, still very much rings true today, specifically if we're looking, let's cast a lens on that dynamic, that we can pull it and say, yep, it is still kind of the same. That it is, we cannot adequately talk about police reform if we cannot talk about the privilege in which whiteness plays in relationship to who is policed and what policing is.
Looks like.
And so yes, Krupke's there to be like, both gangs, everyone to your own side, whatever. But it's like, okay, boys, to the Jets, the white gang in which he sees himself, probably he's known them. I think he even says it, like, I've known you your whole life. You know what I mean? Like, he is not removed from that part of the community. He just it's a performative act that is there. And then there is just the racism that is like, he is there to make sure that, I don't even really know what is he there for. Who knows? But that's a whole other issue.
Well, I think it's supposed to be comic relief. It just never works.
Yeah, I don't. If you have the power to, if you have the authority in any space, I think, to kill someone without question, I don't know that you are the comic relief.
Precisely, and that's why it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not comedy. It's not even tragedy.
No, but this is, but not, well, and not but, because yes, this isn't a show. I mean, it's Romeo and Juliet. Yes. We all know how it ends. It's, if you were like, I wonder how West Side Story ends, take a wild guess. It is, it
spoilers, right?
Yeah, we're a spoiler show. It's fine. But we know how Shakespeare writes his dramas and his tragedies, but it is not all sad. It is not. And part of what I really liked, especially about this new version, but what I think West Side Story does well is that in spaces in which whiteness wants to say, come join us, we're doing this the right, this life is the right life, it shows real joy within like Puerto Rican communities and life in a way that white people need to see, in which I hope more shows and things share and lean into, rather than just like the tropes of hardship or whatever it looks like. But there is just real joy there that is beautiful and lovely.
Captured, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, I think that I didn't know this, but West Side Story was, and I think I read somewhere, was the one time where Puerto Rican-ness was broadcasted to the whole nation or the world, even, right? And so there are pros and cons to that, but I think you're right. I think the joy translated um, was captured. I think there was a decade ago there was a study um, that was done in Holland, and I think Puerto Ricans came like number 3 in the people that are more joyous, and like a top 5 up there, and it all makes sense to all of us because that's part of who we are, and so you make lemonades out of lemons, and you just throw a party, right? When so that's very party people. That's pretty much who we are. We celebrate everything, and there's nobody who is outside of that celebration. I think that was when Anita goes into the candy store and all the boys are there. I think that perhaps in my interpretation that was the intention, right? Of how can we bridge the gap? And she ends up tragically almost getting raped by the gang, right? And that's when she says, okay, it's not even worth putting myself in that situation. But it is that joy that allows us to even consider being friends with our enemies, extending a hand, bridging the gap. And so I think in that sense, West Side Story does good to us in telling that story. Well, we've been a people who've been trying to bridge our relationship with the United States, and it's a love-hate relationship. It's part of who we are. But even before the United States came into play, our story. When you ask a Puerto Rican, what are you? Well, we're Spaniards, Africans, and Native American Tainos. We're very much aware that our bodies carry those 3 heritages, and all of them are in harmony in many ways and in total opposite sides of the spectrum at the same time. And so our bodies, our stories carry those paradoxes and those oxymorons and those contrariedades, right? Lo que es contrario, what it's opposite. And so that's who we are. And so I see that in the roles, in even the songs, right, of West Side Story. You see that attempt, even sometimes failed attempts, to reconcile our identities and the stories of the peoples that we carry with us.
And that's the church.
Yes.
And that is just, or that should be the church. That is the church at its best, when we can say each and every one of us carries the stories of our, the people that have formed and informed and reformed us. And how do we, I think the earlier question that I thought Arthur was going to ask, but he asked it in a different way, but like, how do we hold the difference between like homage and appropriation? Especially in diverse company, right? Because you're looking at the the mid 60s of I was thinking street numbers. I realized it translated as like a decade, but like where Lincoln Center is like, it's at 66th Street, where that's your stop. And so like these mid 60s of the kind of lower Upper West Side, and who lives there and why, and they talk about like the housing and things like that. And right now it is the Met, and it is, ABT, which is just like elite ballet, and the Philharmonic, and all this very lovely, expensive, beautiful things on a site in which real stories have been told of poverty, of immigration, of harm, of love, and of all of it. of Native folks, that it sits on the land of the Lenape and Wampanoag people. And so like how, the church at its best, if the church is this kind of global community, this kingdom, how do we say, I see you, I welcome you in your wholeness, which includes oftentimes my historical oppression of your people. And so like, how do we both name that, but also what does it look like to move together forward, and not just, okay, now that I've named it, you have to forgive me, like all is well, right? We're good. Let's continue to move forward. Because I think that is so often what is talked about, especially when we're like, prayers of confession or whatnot. And it's just like, okay, I've named this sin. Let's all move on. And it just really doesn't happen. And I think stories like West Side Story help us remember, and help us remember that we are part of this larger narrative, even if sometimes we feel so far removed.
Yeah.
Well,
Teresita, I don't know if that was even a question. That wasn't even a question. It was like just a statement. But I just think I don't know, you're serving a context that has such rich diversity and historical, and identity in it in a really beautiful way. And I wonder if you come across that in your work of how to both hold space for what is, and also without taking away what could be.
It's a very painful process, and I don't know how many people are willing to go through the pain of what it means to be humbled on the daily, right? Some people are willing to do that. So, but to consider your question about the difference between homage and paying homage and appropriation. I would say there's no easy answer, but I would say if there is someone, so it takes intention and thoughtfulness and mindfulness to even consider if in the room there's someone who could tell the story, right? Who could tell their own story. I struggle with that on the daily because I am Latina, but I did not migrated. I've never been a farm worker, so but I am this ambassador that at the end of the day has to fundraise for this institution to be able to do what it does best. And I have to tell stories that are not mine. So I have to make the ethical decision of asking permission to share the stories when someone is not willing to tell it themselves. And then the other piece, I go back to history. So I had to dig deeper, and I found out that not the original, but in one of those waves, right? One of the reasons there were so many Puerto Ricans in New York during that time space is because in Puerto Rico, there was a movement that promised every single person a plot of land. And it was ill-planned because there wasn't enough land for every person. So one of the strategies that they implemented was, okay, let's push them out. And they sold this American dream that, oh, you're going to go to the States, you're going to go to New York, you're going to work in the farms, you're going to pick the crops, and you're going to get paid all this money, and you'll be able to come back home when all is said and done. And that was the American dream. The American dream was to come here, make money, and always go back. So when people say, immigrants need to go back to where they came from, well, that's not an insult. That's what we want to do. We want to go back home. We just can't afford to. And so because of all the other complexities of the economic political system. So having said that wave of Puerto Ricans that came to the Northeast were farm workers, were people who picked all the crops in southern New Jersey and upper New York. And the hub was Manhattan because that was where they would arrive in the boats. So I don't know where I'm going with this. What I'm saying is that I had to recognize I have ancestors who were farm workers. So that gives me a place where I can tell the story from an authentic place. But if I don't know that history, I would always feel like an imposter in my role. And so in many ways, I have to recall that and do my homework And I think we all have those stories. We just have to dig deep and connect with them and find ways to be part of the community, and that requires us um, to disengage from the otherness language narrative, right? We're all here, we're all in this land, we're cohabitating. How do we do it in the best way that we honor each other, right? Each other's stories and each other's histories.
I think I think writ large, right? As faith leaders, is that not what we're in part called to do with our scripture? As if we are telling other people's story every single day.
That's right.
And if you are a person of faith who reads your scriptures, like there is very few of us that are, who are historically, traditionally, and like emphatically just like of that story right now, right? And so what does it mean, I think, to just going back to, I think the very first question of this episode, right, is like about context. It's like, is being able to socially locate yourself, say, here's who I am, here's where I have come from, here is what I am doing and where I hope I am going. And here's a story I'm going to tell, and here's where they're from, and here, and to not say that story is my story, but to say that story, I am informed by that story in this way particularly.
Right.
And
take it the step further, which is what are we going to do together moving forward?
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's not my job to dictate what is best for the community I'm trying to work with. It's what do they think, right? Is a priority. And so I think that churches, faith organizations, that's the biggest stumbling block. We still continue to think that we have the best answer. That the best answer is that people need to be educated, that they need to assimilate, that they need to learn English. Well, maybe not. Maybe not. And so have we asked the communities that we're trying to reach what they want, what they think is the best way forward? I think we'd be surprised that we'll find answers that we had not thought of before, but we just have to take the risk and be able to listen and follow that lead.
Ooh. Amen.
Teresita, it's been an honor and a privilege to have you on 2-on-1 today, and thank you for coming to talk about West Side's story. We do conclude our episode. We have a through line through this entire season, series, whatever. But Spiff asks it because she knows the difference between words, like season and series. So Spiff.
Yes, but I don't know the difference between letters and numbers, which is why you do the Jeff one round promise. So
you're a team.
Teresita, thank you for coming on. I was talking to Arthur when we were talking about Sondheim earlier, and we're like, let's do a Sondheim month. I was like, I have the perfect person to ask to see if she would come and talk to us and help tell not only your story, but like, the story of the work that you do. I talk about your work often.
Thank you.
Because I am so inspired by it. And we can be inspired by each other if we are willing to both share and listen to the stories that we are telling. And so I'm just really grateful for you to share yours. Before we go into that final question, though, I just want to give people where can they support your ministry? What is like a website or something, like how?
Sure.
Yeah, like I will put it in a graphic during this as well, and it'll be on all the posting. But I just want to make sure that people know how to give to you and what you are doing.
Absolutely. You can reach us at www.beth-el.org. So it reads Beth-El.org with a dash between the Beth and the L.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And we'll make sure that all our deuces have access to that, because the work we're doing is important and inspiring and part of the greater narrative that I think musical theater tells, and what I think, honestly, what Sondheim has done so beautifully, and or at least tried to. We learn and we grow, but I think that I would say that I would imagine he tried or is trying, and the work he was about recreation. He continued to edit his work well beyond its first and final performances, and I think that we could learn something in that regard too as we learn and grow together. So all of that being said, Spiff, shut up. What biblical theme, narrative, text, book, character, whatever, are you most reminded of in West Side Story?
The whole Exodus story.
Ooh.
But specifically, all the times in the Bible where God instructs the Israelites not to mingle with the Gentiles.
Mm.
That's troubling to me. All the times that God says, "Do not," right? And they built this whole law and this whole system around remaining, isolated and not having that cross contamination, for lack of a better word. But we see in the biblical narrative that they fail miserably at it. And so what does that tell us about it, right? What does that tell us? That we are a human, that we are adaptable, that we are not set in stone, that we grow, that we expand, that we move, and along the way we pick up all these beautiful things that add to it, that add to our lives, that add to our communities. So I see in West Side Story that struggle of trying to remain true to who we are, but not being able to resist the temptation to be with one another in community. And so that's the biblical narrative that I see in this story.
Mm-hmm.
If
I
that
feel
makes sense.
so smart because my answer was Paul always gives the injunctions of there's neither male nor female, Jew nor Greek, or Jew nor barbarian. And I was going to say that neither is the church. We're not Jew nor barbarian. And barbarian, by the way, is just a term for outsider. It's my favorite piece of historical trivia. Barbarian came from, they just thought all the Germanic tribes sounded like bar when they spoke. And that's the whole thing is if we live in a dichotomy, we fail. We have to be an and, not an or. And I love that. I love it. Spiff?
I'm gonna go with Somewhere, like the song Somewhere, as a kind of parallel to the Lord's Prayer. I think that or maybe even prayer in general, but if we kind of focus on, the Lord's Prayer is this kind of posturing of how do we lean and live into the kingdom that we want, that, there's a place for us somewhere, a place for us, that it offers the hope that I think prayer is meant to create and to build upon, to say, like, regardless of your human space and where you are, your faith and the prayers, the relationship that you have to God and the conversations that you have there in the somewhere, that is a place for you always. And so that, God or Jesus telling us how to pray is, I think, less instructive about like the specific words we need and more about the be in conversation with God and community, because within that space you will find where you belong.
Amen. Yes, that's beautiful.
I love it. Teresita Matos-Post, thank you so much for being with us today on 2-on-1 and talking West Side Story. It is an honor to meet you, and I hope, actually, I know our Deuces feel the exact same way. Please, Deuces, by the way, at the end of the show, go to jeffwunrow.com, jeffwunrow.com. Check out the catalog of stoles, of paraments, of liturgical textiles. They're absolutely marvelous. This has been a marvelous time too. Thank you for doing Sondheim Month. Thank you for doing West Side Story. Thank you for listening or viewing. On behalf of 2-on-1, I'm the Reverend Arthur Stewart.
I'm the Reverend Stephanie Kendall.
And I'm Teresita Matos-Post.
Yeah, you are.
Hey, thank you and goodbye. Get more 2-on-1 at 2on1project.com. 2-on-1. You are tuned into 2-on-1. That wasn't my best work, but just wait till you see what I'm doing with Officer Krupke later.
I was waiting for you to be like, when you're a deuce all the way from your first cigarette.
Okay, we're restarting.